Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us for our February edition of CMMC Connect. We're glad you could be here. My name is Lauren Frickle, and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at Redspin. I'll be guiding today's session. All right, we've got an excellent lineup of speakers for Redspin here today. Let's go around for quick introductions. We'll start with our moderator. Jeremy, over to you.
Hey, Jeremy Maris, Chief Janitor at Redspin. Thomas?
You've stunned him.
Well, Jeremy always stuns me. I mean, he's just a stunning gentleman. Dr. Thomas Graham, VPC for Redspin. Been around since pretty much the beginning. Jack of all trades, Swiss Army knife. So more than likely you guys know me, but I'm also Redspin's lead assessor, instructor, as well as the person that tries to keep Jeremy in line, but generally I fail at that.
Absolutely.
All right, Scott.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. My name's Scott Kleins. I'm a CCA with Redspin. I've been here for about 4 or 5 months now, and I bring about 10, 15 years on the ESP side. And to use Dr. Graham's words, I've joined the dark side of the assessment side of the house.
Great to have you here, Scott. Ned.
I'm Ned Butler. I'm a lead CCA with Redspin. Been here a little over a year. And since Thomas didn't say it, I'm just happy to be here.
Nice. You guys know me. I'm Lauren. John, you want to say hi?
Hey, everybody. I'm John Hollett, work with Lauren on the marketing team, and thanks for joining us. Looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Thanks for the introductions, guys. Now let's get into some ecosystem updates from the field. Thomas, over to you.
Lord. All right. So, first of all those class deviations that come out. Honestly, it boiled down to really probably 5 things that's important to the CMMC ecosystem. And that was, first of all, the FAR, 5220421. Well, guess what? The class deviation, biggest thing is just changing its numbering. It's changing its numbering to FAR 52204-93. The second thing is DFARS 7012, which was mentioned in there. There's no change to it. It's still the implementation requirements. You still have to do it. And the implementation of 800-171 is what CMMC validates. The biggest difference, DFARS 7019, it's not there anymore. It's retired. May ask yourself, so why would it retire? Well, for the first time in its recent history, seemingly the department has decided to get rid of redundancy. 2019 had the self-assessment requirements, the input of that score into SPRS. That's now in the 32 CFR Part 170 rule, so that redundancy, it's not needed, honestly. 7020 is still there, but guess what? For some reason, it is now DFARS 7997. So if somebody can explain that numbering to me, please let me know, because I was talking to somebody from PMO this week and they couldn't even tell me the reason why. But it's just changed its numbering schema, and that's it. And then finally, 7021. 7021 hasn't changed. It's the contractual requirements for CMMC. It's still there. Those are the biggest changes. Outside the class deviation, you may have heard of this little agency called GSA that's decided, hey, we need to start looking at our folks too. But if you've actually read the memo, there was a couple of things just right now to be aware of. One, yeah, more than likely what that's indicating is the other federal agencies, as they come online, they're going to start down Rev 3 versus, adopting Rev 2 out of the gate. The second thing is right now they mentioned 3 PALs versus C3 PAOs being the assessors. I know that folks from the program management office are having discussions. So as that unfolds, as more information comes out, please be aware of that if you're going to have to deal with getting verified in the GSA world. Also, yes, we're in 2026. So phase 2 officially starts and only 178 business days away. And thank God I didn't do the math on that. So hopefully whoever did, they were a little bit more coherent than I am. But the phase 2, if you're not aware, that is when the contractual enforcement of CMMC Level 2 is officially required for the department. Yes, there's already stuff coming out that has Level 2 requirements in it. We knew it was going to happen from the start. But once that date hits, if you have a 7012 clause, you're going to have to do it across the board, whether it's self-assessment or third party. Now, this past week, if you listened to the town hall, you probably heard a more detailed explanation of the class deviations than we can provide here. But one of the one of the things that's kept coming up is, what is a significant change? When would I need to get reassessed? And with that, I know that several of our folks were actually able to sit in and listen to that specific verbiage. So before I throw it to Ned, who is doing a great job in our Q&A, I'll speak to the last two bullet points. The first one, or I'm sorry, the second bullet point, mock assessments. They can't convert to a formal L2. Reason being is because under that mock assessment, it may not have followed the requirements that are in 32 CFR Part 170. CMMC formal assessment is a formal assessment. It's outside of what is considered a mock assessment. So just be aware of that if you hear somebody trying to convert it, the AB said, no, that's not allowed, and it's actually in the documentation. Second thing, should we wait for ISACA to take over to tackle CCP, CCA? Well, technically, ISACA has already taken over. They will be fully on board and operational as of April 1st. So, should you wait for them to take over? Well, it's kind of too late. If the question refers to, should we wait for the new versions of the exams? The new versions of the exams are being worked on, but keep in mind that that is a process that, in addition to making sure all the DoD components or DOW components are accounted for, you have to make sure all the NIST components are accounted for, as well as now ensuring that it complies with SACA's requirements as well. So the current versions of the exams are probably going to be around with us for a little while. But if you know you're going to need to get CCP, CCA, don't wait. Go ahead and do it. Right now it's on Rev 2. And more than likely, the next version is probably going to start forward Rev 3. I can't tell you that with any specificity, but it may. So now back to significant change. Ned, I know you're working in the Q&A. Can you shed a little light on significant change for us?
Yeah, it looks like we finally have a question in the Q&A. So significant change. Matt talked about this during the town hall. A significant change would be like an expansion of your boundary, your system boundary, like adding another facility, an acquisition, or divesting of a company. Those would be classic examples. Other examples could be a major technology or architectural change, like going from on-prem to a hybrid or a cloud environment, or, not to show my age, but going from like a Cisco PIX firewall to a next generation, Palo Alto firewall. Those would be major changes. Adding a laptop, maybe upgrading from Windows 10 to 11. That's normal system maintenance. That's system lifecycle maintenance. That is covered under several of the requirements under 800-171. And then lastly, as far as guidance, if you're seeking guidance on what constitutes a significant change, C3PAO or an RPO could provide guidance, their opinion, but it's ultimately up to the affirming official to make that determination. They're really the person that's on the hook for that. So,
I think you covered it. Hey, Thomas, there was a question in the Q&A, and it's if you could go over the GSA, CIO, IT requirement again. You kind of froze up when you covered that a little.
Oh, that's fine. And in full disclosure, guys, I apologize they're here. And so, Thomas, I was going to type it back to you, but since Lauren's given me some time, the GSA memo that was released, the two biggest takeaways from it, at least currently, is one, Rev 3 of NIST 800-171 versus Rev 2. So that's the first thing. And it's kind of an indication that the other federal agencies, they're going to adopt Rev 3 out of the gate versus Rev 2. The second thing is in the memo, it mentions the use of 3PALs or other authorized organizations to validate the implementation versus C3PAOs specifically. I know that some folks from CMMC PMO office are talking with GSA. I would say focus on the Rev 3 component and then wait for final determinations for the validators, if you would. Hopefully everybody was able to hear at that time.
Almost all of it.
Yep. We got it though, I think. Thank you.
We got the high points. So,
And there was a quick question here on the class deviation. Can you repeat the reference that replaced 7019? I believe that one was retired. Oh, Ned.
Yep, Ned posted in there and he's spot on. So once the CMMC rule was published, 32 CFR Part 170, it was duplicative, at least in some form, to 7019, because 7019 had your requirements for self-reporting and uploading it in the SPRS. That's actually in the 32 CFR Part 170 rule because it is. 7019 was now redundant, so they just removed it basically to alleviate confusion. And yes, I did say that talking about the Department of War.
And I know there's questions that were asked this week on the GSA topic and class deviation, so we'll get to them again in this hour. So it's time for pre-submitted Q&A. We've had a lot of great pre-submitted questions this month. Let's start answering them. I'm going to pass the mic over to Jeremy to moderate.
Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining again for the February session here. The first pre-submitted question we have is, if a system is behind a FIPS validated firewall, do I need to enable encryption on all of my devices? If so, does it need to be FIPS validated as well? And Scott, we're going to put you in the limelight right out the gate here and let you tackle this one.
Not a problem. Thank you, Jeremy. So when it comes to FIPS validated encryption, I think it's very apropos that we're talking about some of these GSA updates, trying to consider whether you want to implement NIST 800-171 Rev 3 versus Rev 2, because Rev 2 and Rev 3 have very different ways that they tackle this. And so I'm not going to try to give you a huge, boring history lesson. I'll try to make it nice and short and sweet. For system and communications protection, that's our domain within CMMC Rev 2 and Rev 3, we're specifically looking at 3.13.8 and 3.13.11, data in transit and CUI encryption. This is the names for today. And the general consensus, if you look at the assessment guide, the scoping guide, is it states that FIPS validated cryptography is required when transmitted or stored outside the protected environment. And if it's within the environment, any encryption that you utilize would not need to use FIPS validated cryptography. Now, this is Now, when we switch over to Rev 3, they tighten up things tremendously. And now in Rev 3, 3.13.8 is now titled Transmission and Storage Confidentiality. They give no requirements or ability to provide alternative safeguards. And then 3.13.11 is very specific in stating that the cryptography has to be implemented internally, externally, and they specifically outline things such as servers, book computers, desktop computers, mobile devices, printers. And then if you look at the organizationally defined parameters provided by the DoD memorandum, they explicitly speak to FIPS validated cryptography. History lesson's over. And so the question then is, when are you planning on getting certified? If you're trying to get certified next month, you might have a bit of an easier time getting away without FIPS validated cryptography internally. Encryption, you'll need something, but when Rev 3 comes out, that's when things are going to get very, very clear very quick.
So at least as far as right now, the requirement is Rev 2. Keep in mind that before the department moves to Rev 3, there's going to have to be a round of rulemaking and so on and so forth. So right now, focus on those Rev 2 requirements. Get it in place. Make sure your implementation is there, because that's what you're going to be assessed on. Because outside of having to wait for the rules to be amended at minimum for Rev 3 to take part in the department, once that actually takes place, as I mentioned earlier, now you have to update the training, you have to update the blueprints, you have to update the questions, you've got to train all the assessors, all the instructors. So Rev 3, while it's out there, if you have to deal with another organization outside the Department of War, absolutely. If you're still looking to get certified in the next year or so, at minimum, I would focus on Rev 2.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks, guys. That was a really thorough explanation, Scott. Nice work. Next question. For CUI that only exists on an internal network with all incoming connections blocked at the firewall, does the data need to be encrypted, or does the physical security of the building meet the requirement? And this is almost sort of a follow-up to the previous question.
Yeah. There's not really many differences between the first question and the second question. As Dr. Graham had mentioned, if you're trying to get certified within the next year, follow Rev 2. Rev 2 is explicitly concerned as it relates to FIPS validated cryptography for the transmission or processing of CUI related data outside the external boundary. But I would also say that there is plenty enough references in there where they give organizational latitude to the types of encryption that you're running in the house. I can't tell you what to do. I would argue that it's probably going to be a good idea to run some form of encryption internally. But again, we got to look at Rev 2 and we got to look what it's looking for. Anything else I think I would say on it would just really be repeating what was the previous question.
Excellent. So our company supports both the defense and commercial industries as a build-to-print manufacturer, along with manufacturing of our own designs. How are OSCs securing their common manufacturing equipment like CNC machines or surface mount technology lines, which process CUI data to manufacture products, but then obviously they may be also producing commercial products that don't contain CUI? You're on a roll here, Scott. I'm just going to stick with you.
All right, I appreciate that. So I'm going to follow on a little here with the CMMC scoping guide as well as the assessment guide, both current versions 2.13. If you look in our resources in the CMMC Connect channel here, you can find those, or you can go to the Department of War and find them yourself as well. And so as to how others OSCs are securing their common manufacturing equipment, I would say that most are probably first trying to identify what are the scoping requirements. Looking at this question, they sound like specialized assets. And so if we go to the scoping guide, a specialized asset is an asset that can process, store, transmit CUI, but cannot be fully secured. And so then you want to start taking a look at what are your requirements for that type of asset. Well, we got to make sure it's documented in the asset inventory. We have to have an asset treatment plan in the system security plan. So we want to show how they're managed using your contractor risk-based security policies, your procedures and practices, and then importantly, document them within your network diagram of the CMMC assessment scope. I think it's also really important to consider, as you're trying to plan for this, when you're getting your assessment, what's going to be expected of you from someone like a C3PO at Redspin. And so our obligations are to review your system security plan for these, as well as not to assess against other CMMC security requirements if you've sufficiently documented them. And so I'm going to say first and foremost, document, 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 document. Now, let's get into probably what they were really looking for, which is the practical elements of how to secure these. So how should they? Again, going to reiterate, I don't think it can be underestimated or understated. Document in the asset inventory and your network diagram. They also need to be documented in your risk management processes. Remember, if these cannot be fully secured to be protected against the processing, storage, or transmission of CUI, we would want to see things. How are you assessing it within your risk assessment reviews, your security control assessments, those sorts of things. And then we can get into a little bit more of the details like your technical elements. From a technical perspective, some classic examples: network segmentation, access control lists, VLANs, implementation of strong configuration management baselines like imaging or hardening. And from a physical perspective, making sure they're in a secure area. Then from a management perspective, I think that this is really undersung, and it does come back to some of the things that we've said previously about what OSCs miss. Is you want to make sure that you're incorporating your awareness and training into the proper use and security risks associated with the operation of this equipment. That's classic awareness and training. And then I think with all of that basically combined, I think that you're going to have a good start. Document, reduce your risk, and then document again.
And this is something that comes up in a lot of sales discussions with manufacturers, and there are some great tools out there. Secude is a great tool. Trout, that I've just recently gotten an opportunity to really kind of dive into and explore, is another great tool for creating on-prem enclaves within the organizational network. And it depends on how you're getting the data. Are those CNC machines networked, or are you, getting the data from a workstation, putting it on a USB stick, walking it over, that kind of thing. There's a lot of different scenarios, and we're definitely happy to have follow-up conversations that are more specific to your org. There's a lot of ways to tackle that. Next question. We are currently level 2 certified and would like to add an additional cage code under our existing certification by year end. It was not included in the original assessment because it was a separate legal entity at the time, but is now aligned under the same legal, so on and so forth. Since there are no changes to the enterprise or control implementations, would this be handled as a delta or scope expansion assessment by our C3PAO? Essentially, the answer is you need a new assessment. It is very likely that very little will have changed since the previous assessment, but it's really going to be a discussion of how much time has elapsed. You're going to have to demonstrate new evidence artifacts for demonstrating compliance with these control objectives and such. But ultimately, this is coming up a lot as many in the defense space either are acquiring entities, divesting pieces or entities within their organizational structure. And it's become actually a pretty common question, but essentially adding a new cage code after an assessment does require a new assessment. Am I missing anything there, Thomas? Okay.
You actually covered it pretty good.
Okay. Well, like I said, it comes up in conversations at least a couple times a week now. Handling changes to the CMMC scope effectively and how to manage CUI requirements and identification within contracts easier. As far as handling changes to the CMMC scope effectively, Thomas actually kind of touched on this at the very beginning with what is a significant change? What is not a significant change? If it is a significant change, something that is impacting your CUI scoping and boundaries, that's likely going to require a new assessment. If it's not a significant change, okay, well, then that is going to be something that you would address in your annual self-assessment that you still have to do in SPRS in the years where you're not having that C3PAO assessment. We all need to remember that we still have to go into SPRS and we still have to do our self-assessment. It's a little more involved now if you haven't been into the SPRS module lately. There's a little more legwork that you need to do. It's a little more detailed, but it is still an obligation. As far as how to manage CUI requirements and identification within contracts easier, we mentioned at the top 178 days to November 10th. I do like to remind everybody that is not a deadline, that is a milestone. As Thomas mentioned, there are some contracts floating around that already have CMMC cert requirements. Some of the primes are pushing cert requirements. Even if the DoD issues a new contract after November 10th, you don't technically have to demonstrate certification until time of award on that contract. So there's a lot of variance here. However, what we have seen from a couple of clients is contracts that have been recently put out within the last few weeks that had within them a CMMC certification requirement under the requirement section of the contract. The box was not checked. So the CMMC certification was not in place for that contract, but the infrastructure is already there. And I think that is going to really help people identify if it says that it's CMMC level 2, if it says it's only level 1, this is where it's going to bring some clarity on what are my obligations within this contract for CMMC. I think we'll get better with this, or I should say, I think the DoD will get better with this too as this all evolves and progresses. But that is something that I've been told by a couple of folks that just recently received contract bids or are bidding currently on new contracts being put out for issue, that they do contain level 1 and level 2 certification requirements with boxes to be checked that were just empty right now. That's where those things are at currently, and hopefully where we're getting better. Okay, number of contracts slated for new GSA requirements. Thomas, I'm going to hand you the dartboard and the darts and let you throw away.
Well, first of all, I don't know what the darts are nor the dartboard. I mean, we've just gotten the requirements in. The number, I mean, honestly, here's the thing, guys. When you start talking about number of contracts, if you've been a listener of CMMC Connect now for the last couple of years, more than likely you've heard us talk about this. When the Department of War, at the time it was Department of Defense, when they released 32 CFR Part 170 in its proposed state, or even way back when in the interim rule back in 2020, 2021, anytime there's a release, there's a white paper reduction requirement. And within that, They have to potentially identify how many organizations they think this is going to affect. So within the DoD or Department of War, you've seen numbers such as level 2 third party could be 80,000, in some of the documents I've seen 100,000. Here's the thing you've got to understand. When those contracts are awarded, for the most part, the government awards the contract to the prime. That's who the contract is. That's to this point who has been being tracked. So visibility into all of the subs, all of the vendors, or all of those other external service providers that now fall into the crosshairs. So true number of contracts, honestly, it's like I said, I don't know the dartboard and I don't know what kind of darts I'm going to need at this point. It's going to be a wait and see. I can tell you, as I've mentioned in previous connects, keep an eye out on the federal CUI rule that was released as a proposed rule a little while back. The reason being is because GSA was one of the co-sponsors of that rule. And I have a sneaking suspicion that now that GSA is going down this route, well, that's 2 of the 3 supporting agencies, Department of Defense and GSA. Third one was NASA. So you're probably going to see some movement in that federal CUI bill, which honestly has been needed for a long time. But unfortunately, whoever submitted this question, I know that was a little long-winded. Your guess is as good as mine as far as the number of contracts currently.
Before we jump to the next question, Thomas, did you want to speak to Garrett's question in the Q&A? Well, for everybody's benefit, Garrett's question was, I'd like to know the inverse of the first question. If we have FIPS mode running on all servers and endpoints, does our firewall need to be in FIPS mode also?
Yeah, so like all things CMMC, the qualified first response is it depends. So it depends on what you're using the firewall for. It depends on what is currently encrypting that network traffic. So the FIPS mode running on, let's say, endpoints and servers in a Windows environment, that means it's enforcing, the FIPS validated modules on those items. Well, when it goes external to your organization, that boundary there at the firewall, how are you ensuring that traffic is still protected by FIPS validated module encryption? Is it through the FIPS mode configurations? If it is, or if it's encrypted by something else, maybe the firewall doesn't have to be FIPS validated in and of itself. However, if you're using that firewall for things like VPN or other components, and you don't have the network traffic encrypted any other way, then yeah, it is going to have to be encrypted. My best advice to you, Garrett, and we can definitely take it offline, reach out to us. Let's have a larger discussion. And that way we can get a better sense of how things are configured and give you a more accurate answer. Fair enough?
Silence is consent. Okay, so next question. AI programs attached to on-prem servers which could access CUI, data transfers on the AWS Gov Cloud. How does CMMC apply to these programs, and what steps would be necessary for inclusion of AI programs? Scott, we are going to go back to you on this one.
Thank you, Jeremy. This is kind of a dense one, so I'll try to keep it very straightforward. AI is that next big thing, but I think the biggest thing that I want to share with you is, at least as I see it, software is software, data flow is data flow. We first want to make sure that you understand your obligations for bringing in any cloud solution provider, external service provider. What are they providing? Is this AI program for security related things? Is it just a general CUI asset because it's assisting you in processing, transmitting, or storing it? Once we dial in those, the biggest thing I think that you're going to consider is going back to the data flow. Does it go external from that boundary? I know the question states data transfer is on the AWS Gov Cloud. Are you positive that it's an internalized? I'm assuming this is a large language model. Is it like your a la ChatGPTs or Claudes that may go externally into their systems? Make sure that you understand all the eccentricities of this. And then finally, once you've accomplished all of that, I would say, because I'm a very big NIST special publication guy, if you were to look at NIST special publication 800-218A, this goes over the secure software development practices for generative AI. This is completely apropos to 313.2, security engineering software development techniques.
Excellent. Thanks, Scott. This isn't necessarily a question. So, Thomas, I'm going to throw it this way for maybe your thoughts on why you maybe agree or disagree that it's interesting.
Oh, like I mentioned earlier, it was interesting because for at least that one shining moment, duplication and redundancy and confusion was trying to be alleviated in part of this process. So to me, it was interesting. Hey, that's just me. Bottom line, though, the 7019 requirements, they're just there. It's just in 32 CFR Part 170. That's it.
Excellent. Lauren, there was a question you wanted me to bring to the live, but I'm kind of jumping back and forth between the chat and the QA, and I'm not
That
spotting
was
it.
David Martin's question. David said, as the CMMC audit approaches, my colleagues and I are being asked to work from large, open cubicles. What do we need to do to ensure we are compliant while working from our cubicle?
Have you ever seen Thunderdome? Just curious. So, what do you need to do to be compliant? The first question is everybody in that area, is it a CUI area? Is everybody in that area authorized to have access to CUI, to view CUI? Those are kind of the two first questions to answer yourself. Well, once those questions are answered, and anything additional from a protection standpoint, now you can start having those discussions, because if the answer is no to the first part, well, then you're going to have to disclosure of CUI to anybody that's walking by. If everybody in there's not authorized for CUI, now you're going to have things in place to prevent your cubicle mates potentially from seeing any CUI that you're working on the screen. So it's like I said, answer those first two questions, and then that's going to give you at least some direction on what you're going to have to do, and absolutely plausible.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Next pre-submitted question, moving things along here. How can an organization determine if they are assessment ready versus policy ready? Scott, you want to tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Yes, sir. So I'm going to have to go off of a couple of assumptions on maybe what the intent of this question was going for. So first and foremost, I've said this before, I think OSCs live and die by their policies. If your documentation's incomplete or poorly addresses the CMMC requirements, it really doesn't matter how good your technical implementation is. When you go for your certification assessment, it's going to have some extreme challenges. I think another thing, so now that's the policy part, let's look at the assessment ready. I think a big question to ask yourself as far as your people is, are your people going to struggle or deal with anxiety with the process itself? Have you done something like this of this magnitude before? Assessments can be scary. If you don't know what to expect, what do you say? What don't you say? How do you present the evidence? Or how do you deal with questions you don't know how to answer? These are really important considerations that you need to be thinking about, like, is my staff prepared for this? So ultimately, what is the best way? If you have serious concerns and you don't know if your internal processes for those self-conducted security control assessments are really giving you like the fuzzy wuzzies, I'd say pull the trigger on a C3PO-led mock assessment, which, selfless plug, Redspin absolutely does. And I think that would give you a lot of good indication on where you lay, how tall am I to ride this, CMMC certification or not.
And just as a follow-up too, the mock assessments are absolutely a great option. If you have entirely prepared internally within your own team and done self-assessments, I also strongly advise, get an RPO involved. Bring an RPO in and have them do a gap assessment. Just get that independent set of eyes, because, the old adage is true. You don't know what you don't know. And I really strongly advise, download a copy of 171A, the assessor version, look through what the assessor expectations are for those control objectives. And as Scott said, documentation has been by far and away the single greatest hurdle for OSCs in the CMMC prep journey. So, okay, next slide. If the organization I work for has no experience or knowledge and no compliance department to help understand and learn about FAR and DFARS, what would you recommend to help individuals learn and gain knowledge about all of this? Training courses, schooling, etc.
That's my recommendation. Hang out with me in Europe in a couple of weeks.
As far as learning about CMMC goes, I strongly recommend to every defense contractor that I speak to have at least one member of their team go through the CCP training. Even if they never test for the official certification, the course itself provides a tremendous amount of CMMC foundational knowledge. I don't think every company needs somebody to take the next step and go for the CCA training, but that CCP training really is going to arm someone well to kind of be the point person on your internal CMMC program. As far as FAR and DFARS goes, there are numerous books out there. Dr. Graham gave me one when I very first came on board with Redspin years ago that gave me a complete education in the defense contracting process and federal contracting process. Thomas, Scott, do you guys have some ideas on, like FAR, DFARS education?
Well, that CMMC certified professional, that CCP course that you mentioned, and keep in mind that that is the official certification training that is performed via ATP such as Redspin under the CMMC program. It actually covers a lot of the source documents and the requirements, at least around CMMC as it relates to FAR and DFARS. Now, if your question is really about the full scoping of those, that's a whole other discussion, and it's not something that's going to be easily answered, outside of, going to some of the books or going down the rabbit hole on some of the requirements. But the CCP course, it is the initial course for those folks that want to become assessors. But the source documents and regulations, the FAR, the DFARS, executive orders, it also helps arm organizations with knowledge on how to properly implement the protections based on the individual objectives and requirements. Because in that course, we go through all 110 requirements. We go through all 320 objectives. We talk about it from the perspectives of a consultant and an assessor. That's going to hold true even in the next version of the exams that are, just starting to be worked on. That's going to be your best bet, at least, at this point.
Next pre-submitted question. Are people who don't have CUI clearance, but they are American citizens, allowed to view CUI material as long as they are not in possession of it? I.e., can they look over someone else's shoulder as that person is managing CUI on their PC? Scott, I'm going to throw this one your way.
Short answer, don't do that. Second answer, let's unpack it a little because there's a lot here, and I'll try to be very quick. When I hear the word clearance, I see it says CUI clearance. I know I personally usually think of federal background checks, like getting your official secret or top secret clearance, which when it comes to that types of data, the federal government has huge background check processes. Some of us in this room know all of that lovely, lovely process. But remember, when it comes to CUI, at least in the context of CMMC, this is being pushed on the OSC. So, the CMMC framework really kind of addresses this. So if we look at personnel security, screen individuals. Individuals are screened prior to authorizing access to organizational systems containing CUI. If you're going to have someone that needs to be able to look at it, regardless of whether they're going to be in possession of it, they need to be cleared. You need to screen them, your own background checks, your own validation processes of, again, which needs to be documented in your policies and procedures. This applies to all individuals in the OSC, right? So if you're going to be accessing CUI in any capacity, there needs to be a program for that. Or if they're not supposed to, you need to mark them as a contract or risk managed asset and make sure you see how you prevent them from getting it in the first place. Now, is the American citizen thing, and I just want to touch on this really, really quickly. I know that there's a lot of things spoken about, like, you need to be an American citizen for this, you need to be an American citizen for that. That applies in a lot of ways. But remember, while this is a good consideration, UI is a little more detailed than this. Make sure that you understand distribution limitations regarding the CUI, which can be contract specific. You've probably heard terms like CUI basic, CUI specified, no foreign, ITAR. In the resources page, we've made sure to include where you can look at NARA and the CUI classifications, as well as the OWCUI program distribution statements. That's a great resource to review so you can get an idea about that.
Excellent. Great answer. Great answer. Okay. That wraps up our pre-submitted questions. So this is the point where we like to invite everybody to turn on their camera, turn on their mic, shout out their questions. Thomas mentioned Thunderdome earlier. 5 people all want to shout questions at the same time. We'll see who's still standing at the end. So the floor is open. Otherwise, we'll just find new topics to talk about.
And Jeremy, the Q&A has been pretty active, and Ned's been good on staying on top of typing out answers to the Q&A, and that's just one perk of joining these sessions live is you get to go back and forth with our assessors via chat. If there's any questions that, though, we didn't dive into deep enough, let us know. We can cover them live here.
So while we're waiting for everybody to not be quite as scared at asking Jeremy a question, if you look actually in the Q&A, the last thing that was posted was about the class deviation that came out last year regarding not putting CMMC requirements into solicitations before the rule was actually final. That honestly, it was just a hand slap. It was nothing more, nothing less, because basically the department had to put out something official to tell PMOs and KOs to stop putting CMMC language in the contracts until the rule was final, because they couldn't do it. They couldn't be held accountable. Now that the rule's been final, it's no harm, no foul. It was just kind of funny because, as I alluded to in the actual Q&A, the very next day there were contracts being released in the SAM.gov with CMMC language in it. So did it do anything? Probably not.
Not shocked. So here's a question. I'll throw this out to both of you, Scott, Thomas, and Ned, if you want to chime in as well. Just got dropped in the Q&A. In SPRS, there is one tab that is labeled NIST SP 800-171 assessments and one labeled CMMC assessments. What is the difference? I've been entering my self-assessments in the NIST labeled tab. I have entered my self-assessment required by 32 CFR in the CMMC assessment tab. I'm just not sure this is correct.
This one is easy. One's called NIST SP 800-171 assessments, and one's labeled CMMC assessments. That's the difference, Jeremy.
All right. Okay, cool.
No, so the CMMC assessments, that's where you upload, one, if you're doing uploads of level 2 self-assessments per contractual requirement, that's where it would be. But that's also where your formal level 2 certification will show up, as long as the linkage from EMAS isn't broken this week. Your 800-171 self-assessment, that's something you're supposed to be doing annually anyway. So for those folks, and the reason why they have the two is for those folks that have to go through the formal third-party certification. The 800-171 assessments tab satisfies that requirement that's in 32 CFR. But Gerald, it sounds like you're doing it right, but that's kind of the breakdown.
Excellent. Anyone else have any questions that they want to throw out there?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So we are a vendor to state agencies and federal agencies. We are not CMMC compliant. As a consulting company specializing in solutions, do we need to be CMMC compliant as long as we're not handling CUI ourselves?
That is going to depend on your contract. So we have a number of clients who, in some cases, they provide consultants who work on site at government locations, on GFEs, on government networks, and no CUI ever comes back to them. But the contracts that they have the 7012 clause, and they're being told that they need to demonstrate CMMC certification to show that they could handle, process, store CUI data in a compliant manner if it ever came up that CUI was either necessary for them to hold or was being sent to them. The consulting world is where I hear this question come up the most. We ourselves, we stood up our GCC high tenant back in 2020 to go through our first CMMC assessment in early 2021, but I don't think it was until the certificates got released that we actually had CUI in our GCC high tenant. So that was like 4 years later, but we essentially had to demonstrate that we had the capability to hold CMM or CUI in a CMMC compliant manner. It's really going to come down to your contracts. Do your contracts have the CMMC requirements or not? If they do, it doesn't matter if you have CUI today or not. The contractual obligation is you need to be certified to win or maintain that contract.
And if so, the certification you're referring to is CCP, correct?
No, the certification would be the CMMC Level 2 assessment performed by a C3 PAO. If the contract requires CMMC certification, then your organization will need to go through that C3 PAO assessment of your compliance with NIST 800-171 Rev 2.
Got you. That makes perfect sense. Thank you very much.
Awesome. And we are coming to an end, but before we wrap up, I want to quickly highlight a few upcoming events where Redspin will be on site over the next couple of months. You'll see us here at these events on the screen: CMMC Northeast Summit, IC Southwest, RES 2026, and the EU CyberX conference in Brussels, Belgium. If you are attending any of these, we would absolutely love to connect with you on site, meet face to face, and continue any conversation. So please don't hesitate to reach out or stop by our booths. We'd love to see you there. Our time's come to an end here at Redspin. We're here to help move federal contractors to a more secure, compliant, and resilient state so they can achieve their mission. Thank you very much for joining us today. We'll see you next month on March 20th for our next CMMC Connect session.
This was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Vadim. If we didn't get to your question today, you can also include it in that follow-up survey, and we'll reach out this week.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Have a great afternoon.
See ya.